Hello everybody, my name's Justin Jones and I'm going to be doing a demonstration today showing some integration between vRealize automation and NSX, specifically the distributed firewall feature of NSX. So if you're not familiar with vRealize automation, it's essentially a self-service provisioning portal that can provision workloads both against public cloud like Amazon, EC2 or AWS, as well as on-premises hypervisors such as vSphere or KVM, a variety of other hypervisors. You can see in my catalog here I have Ubuntu 16, which I've actually previously provisioned one of, but essentially the way a user would do this is to click request. You could come down here to the VM, specify things like number of CPUs, the amount of memory. If you allow them to edit the storage, etc., you could do that, and then you would hit submit. Wait a little while, and then after that request completed successfully, you would come over here to your Items tab and see a provisioned virtual machine, which we have here. It's an Ubuntu 16 deployment. You can see the virtual machine that got deployed is named LNX0002. It's connected to VM Networking 01 and has an IP address of 192.168.6.227. And also here is an object that's associated with it that's actually a membership to an NSX security group. So this is actually the out-of-the-box integration that's available between vRealize automation and NSX. We're going to go look at how that works real quick. So if we come over here to the Design tab and look at our blueprint, we can edit the blueprint and actually see on the design surface how this blueprint is constructed, what all the different pieces are. So there's a vSphere virtual machine here, and you can see down here KVM, Hyper-V, Azure machine, Amazon EC2 machine. You could drag a whole bunch of types of different pieces together to make a complex, say, 3-tier application or whatever you need to model, including things like software, containers, networking, all sorts of different components. And you can see there's a lot of things here on how the machine's built, if it's cloned versus kick-started. You can set parameters like minimum and maximum for CPU, storage, and memory. You can add different network cards and attach them to networks. You can see here we're on the VM Networking 01 network. We're using DHCP for IP address assignment. And then we have this existing security group. So the way this was added is actually by coming up here to NSX Networking and Security, and you can actually drag and drop either a tag or a group, meaning that when this virtual machine is provisioned, it'll automatically be added to a security group. So you can see I did existing security group here, and as an example, you could add it to any of these. The one that's already added on the design surface is the security group called Lockdown Linux Servers. It's a model policy which lockdowns Linux servers for high security, maybe for a production system. In this particular instance, it's a web server, so port 80 is open. Maybe you'd open 443 if you're supporting SSL traffic as well. That's how this blueprint works. We're going to actually go through the process of showing how you can extend this using vRealize Orchestrator to do some custom activities. So just to show you what this machine looks like right now from a network profile, we're going to use ZenMap with the Nmap network scanner to scan the system. And you'll see right here that port 80 is open and port 22 is showing as filtered, which means Nmap knows that there's a firewall blocking it. It can't actually reach the end system, but that system essentially may have that port closed or there's a firewall interfering. In either case, it's not reachable. So if we come up to a web browser and come to LNX002, you can see Nginx is installed and that's running. If we tried to SSH it, as we've seen in Nmap, it would just essentially time out and not be able to connect. So if we had, say, an administrator who needed to be able to SSH into that machine for some reason and needed a firewall exception, the normal way that would be handled is perhaps they put a ticket in at the organization that they work on, and maybe in ServiceNow, and then a network administrator would pick up that ticket and actually work the ticket and go into the firewall administrative interface and open up that port to that specific IP, maybe from a particular range of IPs that they know the client system is going to be on. Showing how we would do that manually in NSX is going to be our first step, and we're going to actually automate that task so that vRealize Automation, which is our cloud management portal, can do that on behalf of the user. possibly with some security or approvals wrapped around it so that the administrator doesn't have to get involved at all. So you can see we actually have a policy exception security group here, which implements a security policy which allows inbound SSH. If the virtual machine is added to this group, SSH inbound will be allowed. So let's just show how that works manually. If we edit the security group, this is what an administrator would do on a traditional firewall. They wouldn't even be able to do it via virtual machine name or virtual machine object. They would have to actually do this probably by IP or some sort of group. If we add this, as soon as we add this, the distributed firewall immediately applies that rule. And when we scan that server again, we can see port 22 SSH is open. If we came back to something like PuTTY and try to connect to that server, we would now be able to connect. You can see that I can log in via SSH and do my administrative tasks. So let's exit that. Let's go ahead and clean up the activity that we just did and put it back the way it was by taking this machine out. And then we'll show how the integration between vRealize automation and NSX along with Orchestrator allows you to automatically do this. So I remove it from the group, come back to Nmap, scan again, and port 22 is now filtered, right? So we wouldn't be able to SSH into it anymore. So if we come back to vRealize automation, we're going to actually make a new security action here. So we come up to design and then resource actions, and we're going to make a new action here. You can see some sample actions: start, stop, restart, delete. We're going to make one called request SSH access. That's going to actually be based off an Orchestrator workflow that I've written. I'll have this up on GitHub, but essentially the code here is not very complex. What this code is doing is finding the virtual machine and adding it to an NSX security group. So you could run this workflow and provide it the input of the virtual machine. You can see right here it's coded to add it to the policy exception, allow inbound SSH security group, and use that to actually add the virtual machine using automation. However, the way we're going to tie this in is by consuming this workflow and allowing the user to do it themselves so that the administrator doesn't even have to kick off the workflow. So if we come back here, we're going to do a new resource action. The first thing it's going to ask us is, what workflow do you want to use? We're using this add VMs to security group workflow. Click next. It automatically detects the resource type. The input is an input virtual machine. Go ahead and click next. And then this is the name that it's actually going to show up as on our virtual machines for the activity. So I'm going to call it request SSH access, and the description will be request shell to this VM. All right, and we're going to hide the catalog request page. It's not provisioning or disposal. It's an actual day 2 operation, so we don't need to change those, and we're going to make it always available. If you had a complex action that you were putting together, say the same thing, but you wanted to ask the user for something like a justification for why they need shell access, you can actually put together a custom form here that collects all the pieces of input by putting together text boxes, checkbox, drop down, etc. We're not going to do any of that because we don't need it for this. So we're just going to hit finish. And it's telling us our action form is empty. It says, do you want to delete the form? Yeah, that's fine. We don't even need that form to be on there. So now this is stored as a resource action of vRealize automation, but it's in draft. So I know I'm ready to go ahead and use it. You can see over here it says draft. I'm going to go ahead and publish it. And then the last thing that we have to do is entitle this action. So this action is published and exists right now, but nobody has permission to use it. So you can actually use vRealize automation to control who has access to this action via what's called an entitlement. So if I wanted, I could make a new entitlement called System Administrators and put some Active Directory groups in it, and only people who are in those Active Directory groups would have the ability to request shell access. The button wouldn't even show up for anybody else. Or I could add it to an existing entitlement, which I'm going to do, to give it to everybody, and then wrap an approval process around it so certain Active Directory groups had to review the request and actually press a button to approve it. So you have a lot of governance options to actually control this, this powerful feature that you're giving users. So we're going to edit the business group, come over here to items, and actually here on entitled items, I'm going to click the little add, and we can see that the action that I just created is there now, request SSH access. I'm going to hit OK to add it to this entitlement and finish. And now if we come back here to items, and this is the great thing about this, is even already provisioned items are now going to have this available. If I drill into this virtual machine, you see I can do the actions here and actually request SSH access is there. We could put a custom icon on it. If I click on my virtual machine, I'm going to get an actions menu over here, and you can see request SSH access is on there. So let's actually review and see where we're at. If we scan the system right now, SSH should be filtered, right? So we can't SSH into it even if we were going to do something like putty. It's going to time out, run for a while, and then never happen. So when we request this, what's going to happen is an vRealize Orchestrator workflow is going to be executed in the background. It's going to be past the virtual machine that we specified. The context is because we're on Linux 002 here. That's the virtual machine that we're talking about. It's going to be passed as the input and added to that allow SSH security group. So this is going to happen pretty quickly, but you can see right here, let's run our scan one more time, that it's closed off. So I'm going to hit request. Right here, request SSH access. Come over here. We have a blank form. We could have had, a message that we put on here saying you'll have to wait for approval or this will immediately happen depending on how we have that action created. We hit submit. I'm going to come right back over to Orchestrator, and what we should see happen is the vRealize Orchestrator workflow is going to get invoked. It's going to add that virtual machine to the security group, and as soon as that's done, the distributed firewall is actually going to be reprogrammed to allow that inbound SSH. And you can see it's already executed. It found the MoRef, looked it up, it added the VM to allow SSH inbound. And now if we come back to our Nmap scanner and hit scan, our expectation is that port 22 is open now, and we should be able to SSH back into this virtual machine that we just requested this action on, and you can see we are connected. So that's an example of what you can do with NSX in combination with vRealize automation. Instead of having to have a network administrator, if you think about a traditional scenario, first of all, the user would have had to go to an IT catalog and put in a ticket and fill out all this information. Once that's filled out, it would sit there till a network administrator picks it up. Could be a day, could be 2 days, could be a week, who knows. They would have to action on it, and assuming that they made no mistakes and got the right IP address in and the source and the destination and everything, they would fulfill that ticket and respond, and then that user would get the machine. And if that user was waiting on that machine to get in and do some administrative tasks, they could essentially be dead in the water for a couple days to a week on a project while they're waiting for that. With this system and the integrations we have in place, if they have permissions to do it, it can be requested and implemented immediately, or you can wrap a governance process around it. But in either case, the actual administrator doesn't have to spend their time digging around in the firewall and making this rule. As long as the user requests it and the right people approve it, automation will essentially implement it end to end and deliver that end result that you want, which is a system that's useful to the end user, developer, whoever owns the virtual machine. All right, thanks. Hope to see everybody at VMworld 2017.